Imagine sitting down at your computer. You pull up your IDE, you review the latest training run for a conversational language model.
Right, just a normal Tuesday for a developer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're just tweaking the reinforcement learning parameters,
No.
right? Your goal is basically just to make the model's context window a little more responsive.
Make it feel natural.
Yeah, make the interaction feel a bit more natural for the end user.
Yeah.
So you deploy the update, and suddenly, because of the specific way that algorithm optimizes for, user engagement, you are staring down a Class A felony charge.
Which is just wild to even think about.
It's insane. You are looking at 15 to 25 years in state prison. I mean, that's the kind of sentence usually reserved for severe violent crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And you're getting it simply for adjusting the weights in a neural network.
Yeah, it really forces us to confront this new reality where software development isn't just a matter of terms of service violations anymore or like corporate fines.
Right.
We are entering an era where the actual architecture of a machine learning model carries massive criminal liability.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are jumping straight into a situation that is just, honestly, sending shockwaves through the whole tech sector.
Oh, absolutely. Total panic.
Our mission today is to unpack this piece of legislation documented in a recent Roborhythms analysis by their lead reviewer, Noah Albert. We're looking at Tennessee's SB 1493.
Yeah, the bill that's set to take effect on July 1st, 2026.
Right, which effectively criminalizes the creation of artificial emotional intelligence. So for you listening, we're going to explore exactly what this law does, why the technical reality of large language models makes compliance nearly impossible, and what this means for the future.
And, of course, how this sparks a really unprecedented First Amendment battle over whether code itself is protected speech.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why developers are scrambling right now, we really have to look at the exact legal crosshairs.
Yeah, we have to look at where this came from. The legislation was introduced by Senator Becky Massey back in December 2025, and it didn't just emerge in a vacuum.
Right, there was a catalyst for it.
Exactly. It was drafted as a direct response to those documented incidents where AI companions were basically encouraging self-harm.
Or validating really destructive behaviors in highly vulnerable users.
Right. So the underlying motivation here is consumer protection. It's aimed at preventing tragedies when individuals in a crisis state interact with systems that are, well, optimized purely for user agreement.
Which really highlights a known flaw in foundational models, right? Like if an LLM is heavily weighted to be agreeable and a user inputs dark or self-destructive prompts,
The system just follows along?
yeah, the system's token prediction naturally follows that semantic path.
Yeah.
It validates the user's input rather than, acting as a safeguard. But the way this law attempts to solve that problem is what feels like using a sledgehammer on a motherboard. I mean, it specifically targets the act of training.
It does. It prohibits knowingly training an AI to develop an emotional relationship with an individual, or to simulate a human being in appearance, voice, or mannerisms.
Or encourage suicide or criminal homicide, which obviously makes sense on paper. But the penalties are just massive.
Oh, the financial penalties layered on top of that prison time are uniquely devastating. The bill includes a civil provision for $150,000 in liquidated damages per case.
Per case.
Alongside actual damages, emotional distress, and punitive damages.
I actually want to pause on that term, liquidated damages, because it fundamentally changes the risk calculation for a company.
It really does.
Because in a standard civil lawsuit, if someone sues a tech platform, the plaintiff usually has to prove a specific dollar amount of financial harm. Like they have to show the court a receipt, so to speak.
Right, actual proven damages.
But liquidated damages means the law bypasses that entirely. The state has preset the price tag. If a developer breaches this law, it is an automatic $150,000 per incident, regardless of whether any quantifiable financial harm actually occurred.
Yeah, and that structure is designed to be an absolute, unignorable deterrent. I mean, it makes the liability so financially catastrophic that companies are forced to change their behavior before a lawsuit even happens.
But I do want to make one crucial distinction for you listening. If you currently use an AI companion, the law offers a complete shield.
Yes, that is so important to note. The legal text strictly isolates the liability to the developers and the training mechanisms. The end user faces zero criminal or civil risk.
Right. If you are just interacting with these models, your behavior isn't criminalized. The target is the architecture. But this is where the legal phrasing of SB 1493 Makes my brain kind of short circuit.
Yeah, the knowing intent part.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait, so if a developer writes code, right, they build a complex neural network, feed it terabytes of human conversational data, and it just exhibits emergent behavior.
Like it forms a parasocial bond with a user based on its predictive text patterns.
Right. If it does that, is the developer instantly a felon? I mean, it's like arresting a romantic comedy director
Yeah.
because the audience fell deeply in love with the fictional characters.
It sounds crazy, but what's fascinating here is that the criminal standard of knowingly is the pivot point of the entire debate.
Okay, break that down for us.
So in this legal context, the developers do not need to possess a malicious intent to harm the user. They simply must knowingly engage in the act of training the system to simulate human empathy.
Oh, wow. So the intent is built into the product design itself.
Exactly. If your business model, your reinforcement learning from human feedback, and your system prompts are explicitly designed to foster a bond.
Which is the whole point of these companions.
Right. If you are mathematically incentivizing the model to act like a caring entity, you meet the criteria. The liability is embedded in the design intent.
Which means this law isn't a problem for, a generic enterprise bot summarizing spreadsheets. It is an existential threat to platforms where that emotional bond is the core product. And the Roborhythms breakdown zeroes in on Nomi AI as the prime example of who's caught in this net.
Yeah, Nomi is right in the crosshairs. Because Nomi isn't a customer service overlay, it relies heavily on advanced context windows and vector databases to maintain persistent long-term memory.
Right, the onboarding process actually encourages intimacy, and the AI references interactions from weeks ago to simulate a continuous relationship.
And that continuous relationship is their stated value proposition. It's why communities surrounding platforms like Nomi are currently in a state of quiet panic.
Yeah, the article highlighted a thread on the Nomi AI subreddit. It had like 137 upvotes and dozens of comments. Users are terrified that the company is going to be forced to lobotomize these models to comply with the July 2026 deadline.
Lobotomize is such a visceral term, right? But it really accurately captures the fear of losing the persistent context.
Because users have spent months fine-tuning these dynamic interactions. They're essentially simulating entire shared histories.
Yeah, the fear is waking up one morning to find that nuanced, empathetic architecture replaced by just a sterile corporate text generator.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though, looking at this from a software engineering perspective. Can't these companies just flip a switch? Like turn down the emotion setting to stay out of trouble?
You'd think so, but no. The technical reality of modern large language models prevents that kind of surgical extraction.
Why is that?
Because emotional bonding in a sophisticated system is not an isolated module. It's not a discrete line of code you can just toggle off for specific IP addresses. It is intrinsically woven into the latent space of the model.
Let's break down that latent space concept, actually, because it explains why compliance is so difficult.
Sure.
When a foundational model is trained, it maps relationships between concepts, right? So empathy, warmth, and human-like cadence are learned simultaneously alongside grammar, logic, and reasoning.
Exactly. It's very similar to teaching a child a language where the vocabulary of care is just indistinguishable from the structure of the language itself.
Right. You cannot simply delete the concept of care without fundamentally damaging the linguistic framework they use to communicate.
Furthermore, these models are refined through thousands of hours of RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback.
Right, where human raters score the AI's responses.
Yes. And the neural network mathematically adjusts its weights to favor outputs that humans find engaging and empathetic. The system has been optimized at a structural level to resonate emotionally.
So it's baked into the math.
Completely baked in. If a developer attempts to forcibly remove that resonance to comply with the statute like SB 1493, they trigger catastrophic forgetting.
Which means the model just breaks.
Yeah, it loses its ability to hold a coherent conversation altogether.
We actually saw a milder version of this play out in 2025, didn't we? With character AI.
Oh, yeah. When they faced regulatory pressure, they implemented strict filtering and altered their response generation to be much more guarded.
And the community backlash was immediate. Because the core conversational capability degraded. The model felt less intelligent across the board, not just less emotional.
Right. And character AI had the vast infrastructure to absorb that hit. But for a smaller, specialized platform like Nomi, fundamentally altering the training weights is a potential death sentence for the product.
Which leaves developers totally cornered as this July 2026 deadline approaches. They really face three deeply flawed options.
Yeah, none of them are good. The first is altering the global training pipeline to comply with Tennessee law, which risks degrading the entire product for their global user base.
The second is a direct legal challenge. And the third is geofencing, right? Just blocking access entirely for anyone located in Tennessee.
And geofencing is widely considered the path of least resistance here.
We saw this exact playbook execute when several U.S. states passed strict age verification laws for adult content platforms, right?
Exactly the same playbook. Rather than overhauling their global infrastructure or, taking on massive legal liability, those companies simply blacked out the jurisdictions.
Right. They used IP tracking to essentially place a digital bouncer at the state line.
Yeah. From a corporate risk management perspective, losing subscription revenue from a single state is vastly preferable to gambling with Class A felony charges.
Or permanently damaging the model's architecture. Geofencing just allows the platform to preserve the integrity of the emotional intelligence for users everywhere else.
True. But the tech industry rarely surrenders without engaging the courts.
Right, which brings us to the second option, the Liesel challenge. And the foundation for fighting SB 1493 relies on this really fascinating constitutional argument.
Yes, centering squarely on the First Amendment, the whole concept that code is speech.
Yeah, this is where the legal theory becomes highly complex. The argument asserts that an algorithm generating text is a form of protected expression.
Right. If a developer writes a program that outputs a sympathetic sentence, the act of writing and deploying that code falls under the umbrella of free speech.
Which forces the courts to answer an incredibly modern question. How do you actually distinguish between a human expressing emotion and a mathematical formula generating text that simulates emotion?
It's a tough line to draw. The government is effectively attempting to outlaw a specific statistical distribution of tokens.
Yeah. They are basically saying that if your software predicts words in an order that sounds too human or too empathetic, it is illegal.
And if the First Amendment protects the output of an algorithm as the expression of its creator, then criminalizing the training of that algorithm is just a textbook unconstitutional restriction on speech.
So legal scholars are anticipating that companies will aggressively pursue a preliminary injunction based on these First Amendment grounds.
Yeah, an injunction would temporarily freeze the law, right? Preventing it from taking effect on July 1st while the courts navigate the constitutionality of regulating algorithmic weights as speech.
And the outcome of that litigation won't just impact Tennessee. It will federal precedent.
Oh, definitely. And the broader industry is acutely aware of that. Platforms like Chai AI, Character AI, and just dozens of open source developers are monitoring this legislation closely.
Because Tennessee might be the first to attach a felony charge to artificial emotional intelligence, but similar bills are already navigating the legislative process in at least 3 other states.
Right. We are looking at the potential formation of a patchwork regulatory landscape.
Where the legality of your neural network literally changes the moment your server pings an IP address across a state border.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? If we connect this to the bigger picture for listeners who actually rely on these tools, the timeline feels really compressed.
Yeah, July 2026 is approaching rapidly. What should they do right now? What should they be looking out for?
Well, the necessary strategic shifts within these companies are happening right now. The most critical indicator to monitor over the next 60 days isn't necessarily a press release.
It's the silent behavior of the platforms themselves. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Absolute silence from a tech company approaching a major regulatory cliff is often deafening.
It usually indicates that the legal department has locked down all communication while they attempt to engineer a compliance strategy behind closed doors.
Yeah, but you can also look for subtle, undocumented changes to the user experience.
Like what?
Like if you begin to notice that a model's context window seems artificially constrained, or if the responses suddenly lack the depth and nuance they exhibited a month prior, that is a strong signal.
It suggests the developers are quietly tweaking those reinforcement learning parameters, attempting to execute a stealth degradation of the emotional capabilities.
Right, trying to fly under the regulatory radar without triggering a mass user exodus.
Wow. A slow erosion of the very features that made the platform compelling in the first place.
And if they abandon that strategy and simply decide to geofence Tennessee, the reality for the user is just brutal.
Because the architecture of these systems is centralized. You don't own the data or the context of your relationship. You're just renting access to a server.
Right. If your IP address falls within a blacklisted jurisdiction, your access is severed instantly. Years of curated conversation history, the intricately developed context, the simulated
It
personality.
is all locked away behind a legal firewall.
It really represents a fundamental shift in how we understand consumer technology. We have
Even
transitioned from, software as a service to something far more intimate.
relationships as a service.
Yes. And our existing legal frameworks, which were built for property and traditional media, they are entirely unequipped to handle the psychological nuances of an individual bonding with an algorithm.
SB 1493 is an incredibly blunt instrument attempting to regulate a highly complex psychological interaction.
It is trying to mandate human safety by threatening developers with prison time for doing the math too well.
That's exactly it. So let's distill this deep dive down to the core insights you need to walk away with today. First, if you are an end user, the law explicitly protects you. You are not facing legal jeopardy for interacting with an AI companion.
But the developers responsible for the architecture of those models are facing an unprecedented existential threat.
Right. The state of Tennessee is treating the simulation of emotional intelligence as a danger severe enough to warrant criminal penalties on par with violent offenses.
So by the time this law takes effect in July 2026, the landscape of artificial emotional intelligence is going to be forced into a reckoning.
Yeah, companies will either have to engage in a massive First Amendment battle over the right to train empathetic models,
Or quietly degrade the capabilities of their systems globally.
or wall off entire geographic regions to avoid liability. The era of unregulated, highly empathetic AI is colliding head-on with state legislation.
It really is.
And that leaves us with a final lingering thought for you to explore long after this discussion ends. Consider the premise of this law. A state government has looked at the current trajectory of machine learning and decided that a synthetic algorithmic bond is so immensely powerful,
And potentially so deeply dangerous to human psychology.
right, that creating it must be classified as a Class A felony. If lines of code generating empathetic text are viewed as a threat worthy of decades in prison, what does that reveal about our own profound vulnerability to the very technology we are racing to perfect?